Hi, and welcome to this webinar on training Google to drive your sales pipeline. My name is David Reski, CEO of NowSpeed Marketing, and my guest is Mark Moore, Director of Search Marketing at NowSpeed. Mark, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I love this title that you created for the webinar on training Google to drive your sales pipeline. Notice we didn't say training Google to spend your money, which is far easier, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark, you've been doing search marketing for a number of years. How long have you been doing search marketing, and how much money do you think you've managed for clients on doing search marketing?
Yeah. So I've been doing this for a little over 8 years now. And over that time, I've managed a little over $200 million lifetime. So quite well versed in this space, and unfortunately familiar with both Google being good and also Google being bad. So definitely have learned quite a bit of how to really optimize Google to focus on what matters here.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before we get into the topic itself, what are some of the biggest changes you feel like you've seen during your career in working with Google Ads?
Yeah, yeah. So I definitely think one of the more recent larger changes is around the AI space and really just how efficient Google's machine learning has gotten, right? So that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today, where Google's AI is extremely powerful, and whether it's learning a good habit or a bad habit, it will be learning nonetheless. And so really just how search has changed, in my opinion, is really not just about the core search program itself anymore, but really how we're working with the AI and training the AI to make the search program that much more efficient, has really kind of changed the game, in my opinion, over the past few years.
That's great. Well, you've got a lot of material to share with us today, and thanks for putting all this together. I'm, really excited about this topic because so many companies spend so much money on Google Ads, but they're not taking advantage of all the latest techniques. I mean, you do audits for companies all the time, and it's just unbelievable how many missed opportunities that we see. So this program that you put together for us today, I think you're going to cover a lot of those things and help a lot of
Absolutely.
people think about going much deeper and doing a better job with Google Ads. So thanks for putting this together. So I'll let you take it from here, and I'm excited
Absolutely.
about what you have to say.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Perfect. Okay, so the first thing I want to just touch on here is really our approach to growth in general is now speed, and a lot of what we'll be talking about today in terms of the opportunities here. So the first thing really that I want to highlight is this isn't about taking huge swings. This is about creating a predictable, sustainable, and very strong compounding growth in our channel. And really, the intention here, as I mentioned, is that it's not just about the program itself anymore, but it's really about how we're working with the technology itself. In this case, really how we're training Google's AI to understand what our end goal is of taking something such as lead quality, which can be fairly subjective, and passing that back into the platform itself to train the system. And the way that we do that successfully is that it does require this ongoing feedback loop. As I kind of mentioned earlier, whether it's good or bad, Google will learn a habit very quickly. And so the intention here is that we want to create a positive habit, with the idea being we're training Google to improve by that 1% every single day, where that 1% growth compounds on itself. And that allows for the exponential growth very, very efficiently, right? So a lot of what we'll be talking about today is how we can train Google to enable that growth, and to enable revenue growth very specifically, so that we're not just driving leads for the sake of driving leads, but that we're driving qualified leads across the board, and how we can scale that up across this. So again, as we mentioned at the beginning of this call, I personally manage a little over $200 million currently on the NowSpeed team. We manage a little over $40 million, excuse me, annually. And generally speaking, these tactics do help our average client grow at about 100% year over year. And this really helps enable that progress, and allows to enable that growth. So really what we'll focus in on today is, again, as I mentioned, um, so I'm getting a little bit of feedback there, if you don't mind just muting on your side there, Narav. The three key areas that we want to focus on, first and foremost, of course, is going to be the platform itself. So how do we optimize the platform around our campaigns, our ad copy, our bid strategy, et cetera. But then also understanding how our sales and marketing is connected back into the Google Ads to make sure, for example, our Salesforce, our HubSpot, our CRMs are passing the right data back into the system. And then lastly, too, is then how do we optimize the post-click experience? So again, these are kind of the three core fundamental areas that we'll be focusing in on today at a higher level, to really understand how we can train Google with these advanced tactics, to effectively train Google to build that exponential revenue-focused growth. And again, I want to quickly call out here, this is a standard practice that we do across all of our clients. These tactics are very, very well established. And they are tactics that we have seen work, whether it's in airlines, whether it's in entertainment, whether it's in manufacturing, et cetera, right? Legal tech, whatever it may be, across our client portfolio, we've seen this work very, very well across a number of different industries. So as long as you're trying to optimize towards qualified leads and trying to drive revenue for your Google Ads channel, which you absolutely should be, these tactics will be very, very relevant to you and should be very applicable to your business, regardless of your industry or vertical. Wonderful. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the tactics themselves. I have this set up as a bit of a step-by-step process, and we'll kind of chat through these in terms of an order of operations. And what I would suggest is how we want to initially tackle this. So first things first, again, step one here. Of course, this is the most important step across everything here because this will enable every single other aspect of what we'll be talking about today. But of course, this is going to be about enabling Google to actually track pipeline. So the reason why we want to do this at a very high level is, let's say within a pretty basic setup, we might have a contact form, a demo submit, and then once the prospect fills out one of those forms, of course, sales will engage with that person. And then generally speaking, we'll go from an initial lead to an SQL to an opportunity to eventually, hopefully, a closed one, right? Generally speaking, on a marketing team, we want to focus on driving that opportunity pipeline to tell sales we're driving qualified leads back. We're pushing that opportunity stage as much as we can. Here's the associated pipeline revenue towards that. But the primary issue is for most accounts, as David mentioned earlier as well, during our audit process, we often find that most accounts are only optimizing towards the initial lead stage. And due to the nature of machine learning, technically speaking, we're telling Google optimize for the cheapest possible lead, right? But we know that oftentimes the cheapest possible lead isn't going to be the most qualified lead. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to move away from this idea of kind of a lead-based bid, where again, every single stage, whether it's an initial lead, SQL, et cetera, all of these stages in Google's eyes are considered the exact same in terms of what the actual impact of the business is. We want to move away from that, and we want to move towards what we call a revenue-based bid, where Google then understands an initial lead might be worth 200 times less than a closed one. Because again, we'd of course modify this based on each individual business. But the idea here is to tell Google that if an initial lead is worth $10, but a closed one is worth $2,000, then therefore we're training Google to literally understand our goal here is to work towards revenue and not just to work towards the cheapest possible person. So the main thing that we want to call out here is that we need to set up a direct integration, either with HubSpot or with Salesforce, for example, or if we have a custom CRM, you can still track what's called the GCL ID, like the Google Click ID, into a spreadsheet and then directly upload that back into the platform itself as well. And Google does have a ton of documentation for how to set this up. We won't have enough time to really get into the nitty gritty of that here, but they have a lot of details really on how to set this up. Effectively, it's really just about enabling your CRM to be able to capture the Google Click ID. And what that then allows is that for every single person that converts, they're assigned a unique Google Click ID where every single instance is fully encrypted. So we won't actually know who that person is on our side, but Google will then be able to understand that specific lead. And as they move through the initial lead, the SQL process, the opportunity, et cetera, Google will then also be able to understand as they move through those process in your CRM, that'll automatically pass back into Google itself. So then Google starts to understand, okay, Mark became an initial lead, and then he turned into an SQL, an opportunity, et cetera. And then we're literally training Google to understand, again, as a very early step here, but we're literally training Google to understand these are the type of people that are driving revenue for us. And these are the type of people that we ultimately want to hone in onto. Again, moving away from cheapest possible lead to the best possible ROI from our leads. And that's the key difference here between using a lead-based model and a revenue-based model. Okay, so once we have everything set up in terms of the actual technical integration between our CRM and Google Ads, the next step here is to really understand, again, looking at our keyword strategy and understanding how we can not only scale existing keywords, but also how we can identify net new keywords. And so the intention here is that we really want to leverage this data from Google to then take a really honest look and say, are there certain keywords, for example, that maybe look really good from a cost per lead perspective and are driving a really cheap cost per lead for us, but the actual return on ad spend is quite a bit lower due to the nature of the search, right? And often what can happen here is that this could just be something as simple as we have maybe a keyword that, for example, is a bit more broad, right? Like literally using a broad match keyword, and Google is plugging in certain searches that maybe aren't as relevant for us. And then therefore, we're just finding that we're bringing in a lot of traffic that maybe is a little bit off our ideal customer, right? And we're really not hitting that ICP there. And we're just finding that Google's, again, giving us a cheap lead, but not a strong lead or an efficient lead. And so the first thing that we want to do there is once we're packing that data back in, I would highly recommend that you structure your campaigns based off of the performance. But generally speaking, what we see here is that exact match keywords are going to do quite well for us. But if we include our exact match keywords with our broad match, for example, Google's going to heavily over index and just say broad is going to get a lot more of that budget, a lot more of that spend, a lot more of that market share, right? And the main issue with that is that if our exact match are our most efficient campaigns and we have that kind of bundled into broad or phrase, then we're going to find that our exact match campaigns are going to have a really low market share, are going to be not as efficient. And so what I would highly recommend here is once you do a bit of an audit on your keywords, again, using that Google Click ID information to understand what keywords, what match types, etc., are actually driving performance for you, I highly recommend that you segment your campaigns based on exact, phrase, and broad to allow for absolute control over your budget. And then that way, too, generally what we find is our exact match campaign. We want to try to max out that market share as much as we can for where it makes sense for us as a business, because then we'll find we're being extremely intentional with those keywords and we're continually getting clicks, getting leads, and getting opportunities and pipeline from our strongest possible keywords. Once we've structured our keywords in terms of those kind of ad sets around exact, broad, and phrase, I would still recommend that we have broad and phrase active because it absolutely will work well for you, especially if you have it backed against a revenue-based bid. Then we have a lot more confidence to bid into broad and to bid into phrase. And then what we could also do here is use those kind of broader phrase and broad match campaigns to identify net new keywords from the search term report that maybe we're not intentionally targeting quite yet, but broad and phrase is kind of picking up, hey, this is your ideal customer. People that are searching for these things are also very likely to convert into a qualified lead for you. Then use a search term report to pull out those keywords they're not actively targeting quite yet, but are converting for you. And then pull those back into your exact match campaign, where you can then very intentionally increase the market share, increase the budget, etc., across those really, really strong keywords. So essentially, once you've done this full keyword audit, kind of that restructure here as needed, right? Again, maybe you'll get lucky and your kind of your default structure is working well, but it's very likely you'll have to restructure things a little bit. Once you have that set up, then it becomes an ongoing process of using what we call keyword harvesting to effectively look through that search term report, identify net new opportunities in terms of those highly converting into qualified leads or into opportunities for you, pulling those back into your exact match campaign, and then just having that ongoing process of scaling while being very efficient and being able to build that business case because you know these are highly converting keywords into opportunities, into those qualified leads for you, driving that pipeline. And then you can efficiently scale through an exact match structure to make sure that you're bidding to exactly that keyword you want to target and really kind of scaling that up and pushing that through here. And it's a really nice way to kind of restructure search to accommodate to more of a revenue-based model while being able to continually scale and grow without the potential limitations of having an exact match only campaign.
Yep. Mark, just a quick question on this. If a client's got a limited budget, do you put all of your budget into the exact match category, or do you still spread it out across all three categories, hoping to find potential keywords that you're going to move into higher quality categories as you go? How do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, so it's definitely a bit of a balancing act. I would still recommend you want to be a little bit stronger around exact match if you have that keyword set that you know is established and that is worthwhile, just because that's going to be your bread and butter and your really strong core keywords you want to own. But there is a world where you will eventually hit a diminishing return, where as you scale up on market share, every single time you scale up from 20% to 30% to 40%, it is going to get incrementally more expensive because effectively, as you gain more market share, you're going to have to price somebody else out of the auction. So it is going to be a little bit of a case by case basis, but eventually you will hit a point where exact match the unit economics might just be too expensive to get that incremental. And so in that case, using phrase and broad, maybe in a little bit more of a limited capacity, but can still be an effective strategy to then find net new keywords that are efficient for you. But again, Google being Google, and not to sound too cynical, but I'd highly recommend that you always want to have those broader campaigns tied back to a revenue model, just because Google will inherently go for the cheapest possible lead if you don't have the revenue based in there. So there definitely is a world to play with broad and phrase, but I would recommend that you push exact match first because it's going to be the most scalable to the point that you don't see those diminishing returns from a CPC perspective.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so the next step here too, when we're kind of just like looking through our overall model. So once we have the actual revenue tied back into the platform, and then once we have our keywords accommodated and set up to be able to kind of absorb a lot of that data and to really scale things up here. The third step is talking a lot more about how we're actually training Google in the machine learning, as well as how we're controlling for these parameters through portfolio bid adjustments, right? So generally speaking, the way that Google will operate is that most machine learning, if we have it set at a campaign level, the data, if you imagine through the green lines here, will flow to the individual campaign, right? And most times this can work, right? But on a revenue-based model, this could be a bit of a limitation because Google requires for it to be efficient at least 15 to 30 events per event to learn from, right? So when we're talking about driving leads, normally it's easier to drive 15 to 30 leads on an individual campaign basis, again, based on your budget. Generally speaking, it's a little bit easier. But if we assume potentially 25% of those leads are going to turn into opportunities for us, or maybe 50% turn into an SQL or workable lead, of course, that can make it a little bit more difficult to maintain that level of 15 to 30 per month on an individual campaign basis. And so one thing that we found has worked really, really well is what's called a portfolio bid. And essentially what this does is we can loop our campaigns together where the only thing that will be shared is the data of learning. So for example, you're just still going to have individual control over budget, over keywords, over ad copy, etc. The only thing that we're doing here is that we group our campaigns so that the machine learning understands rather than sharing the data on an individual campaign basis, we're grouping these campaigns together to share the learnings across those campaigns. And the reason why we strongly suggest this is because this allows it to effectively learn significantly faster, right? Because you're going to get more events where, for example, in theory, if you go from a single campaign to sharing learnings across 4 campaigns, theoretically, you're going to have 4 times as many events being passed through. So it's 4 times as many SQLs, 4 times as many opportunities. And then therefore, Google's going to learn that much faster. And so it'll allow for it to actually leverage that revenue data because, again, if you don't hit that minimum requirement, then Google will just be infinitely stuck in a learning loop and you'll never move beyond to a more mature state of learning. So this is really critical for how we actually segment the information and share it across our campaigns. As well as anything net new we build, if we then add that back into the portfolio, it'll learn almost instantly. So for anything net new, generally speaking, on an individual campaign basis, Google needs about 14 to 21 days for the machine learning to really hit a point of learning and to scale versus if we use a portfolio bid, this will take closer to kind of 7 to 10 days because there's going to be so much historical data for Google to already leverage. And therefore, anything net new we build, we'll just be able to use that historical portfolio bid and learn that much faster. One other nice little treat on this too is that portfolio bids are the only way we can actually add a CPC limit, either a top limit or a bottom limit on our cost per click while using machine learning. And the reason why I stress this so much too is sometimes Google being Google, we can find that machine learning can overbid a little bit. Where, for example, if our competitor's on machine learning and we're on machine learning, we'll bid up, they bid up, that we bid up, etc. We keep going back and forth, and it kind of creates a bit of an inflated CPC there. The portfolio bids not only make your campaigns learn that much better, but you can also say, we're only willing to pay $25 cost per click based on our numbers, whatever makes sense for your business. And then you can apply that to the portfolio as well. And that can stop you from overbidding by $60, for example, in some cases, or $70, right? It'll help control that cost per click limit. So you're still competitive, but you're not accidentally overpaying on clicks, which is another very common mistake that I see with machine learning.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Mark, in your experience, why do you think companies are still using campaign bidding versus portfolio bidding? What, you do a lot of these audits, you see this strategy all the time. Why do you think they're not all moving to this new strategy?
Yeah, honestly, when I normally pull this out in the audits, it normally is overwhelmingly supported by our clients. So I think it's something that, frankly, just a lot of people aren't very well aware of.
Hmm.
Again, it is something that works very, very well, but oftentimes doesn't necessarily work in Google's favor because we're adding bid limits, because we're making our campaigns more effective. We're just effectively finding ways to really limit wasted spend. So I often find that there's a lot of these things that exist in platform that, unless you're really hands-on keyboard and have the experience behind it, a lot of times is kind of hidden, where Google doesn't necessarily outright tell you about a lot of these options. So again, I just find in my experience that it's something that a lot of people kind of perk up to and say, "Hey, I didn't know this even existed. This is really great to see." But unfortunately, Google just doesn't make a lot of these opportunities front and center. Where again, Google's been leaning a little bit more towards kind of automation versus kind of control. So I think in that case, this leans a little bit more to the control side versus the kind of automation piece. So I think that's where Google maybe makes it a little bit harder unless you're really experienced to maybe pull out some of these ideas.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so the fourth step here is going to be, again, very, very critical. So once we kind of have our data being passed through properly, and at this point, the idea is to say we have our keywords set up properly, we have our events being passed back through for actual revenue-based events, and ultimately, we do have that portfolio bit in place. So we're confident that the actual machine learning itself is optimizing towards the right person. The next step here is really how we optimize towards that ideal customer profile or to our ICP, right? And this really comes down to the who behind the search as much as the search itself, right? So I think, as we all know, of course, search, of course, is going to be heavily reliant on our keywords, but there's a huge difference between someone that's searching with the intention of being your ICP versus somebody that maybe is looking for a definition, somebody that maybe is a student, somebody that maybe is an intern, for example, right? Where again, they all might be searching for the same thing, but the who behind the search is going to be vastly different. And ultimately, what we're going to find is that's going to massively impact your opportunity rates. That's going to massively impact your revenue potential, right? For example, if we want to engage mid-market users versus maybe SMBs, right? That is going to play a huge role because they're going to search the same thing. But the difference there is the who behind the search is going to be critical, right? So Google does have an incredible amount of data on all of us, right? Where it has thousands of different ways we can target based on demographics, based on keywords, based on income, versus in market segments. And a lot of this we can have control over ourselves as account managers, right? So we can go into Google here and we can modify our household income targeting, for example. We can modify age targeting, all these different things. But the main kind of call out here is that it's critical to be measuring this as well, because Google will always try to kind of sneak in some traffic that might not be in your best interest. And oftentimes, what we'll find here is that when we kind of go through these audits and start working through this, we'll definitely notice that a big indicator is that the demographic report shows that, sure, maybe half of the traffic is qualified towards your ICP, but the other half of the traffic is never going to be your ICP because, for example, the income segment might be too low, indicating that they're not management or above, right? Which would generally speaking be decision makers. We might be finding they're too young, where they might just be more likely to be students, for example. All these different things definitely play a role into how we optimize the account itself as well. So while we have the machine learning training in optimizing and learning, it's really critical that we also add these demographic layers on top of all of our campaigns as well to try to get ahead of things as much as possible, right? So some common pitfalls here that I see, again, as I mentioned already, income is normally a big one. Where generally speaking, again, depending on your ICP, but for most B2B businesses, we want to get in front of decision makers. And so generally speaking, income will help you indicate where someone is in their career and whether or not they could be a decision maker. As well as if we do see a high number of unknown traffic, oftentimes that over indexes to be a lot of bot traffic, a lot of people that aren't really trackable and aren't really who we want to get in front of. So that's another one we want to kind of avoid. And it's really important here too that we're using both our own third-party data within Google itself. So for example, who we see as our ICP, but that we're also using our own first-party data. And we can go as far as actually uploading our own customer lists, for example, into Google to then say, this is what our customer looks like. So for example, if you have a list from Salesforce, from your CRM, et cetera, you can upload that into Google and tell them literally, this is what our customer looks like. And then as the machine learning is learning, it can also use all of that historical data that you have from your CRM to then get ahead of things a little bit and then optimize even further into that demographic to really find your core ICP. So it's a combination of both manually adjusting this yourself, but also how you're enabling Google to understand your data and how you're enabling it to really get in front of the right ICP, ultimately to say, how can we improve op rates on the same spend? The who behind the search is going to be critical for how we can accomplish that. Wonderful. Okay, so just moving ahead here too, now that we've talked a lot about the actual setup itself of saying, okay, how do we improve our traffic? How do we move towards optimizing towards opportunities and not just the cheapest possible lead? Um, Now that we have all of that in terms of the actual technical implementation itself, now the question becomes, how do we scale, right? So there's two ways, of course, we can scale. First of and foremost being if you just want to invest more budget, that is always an option. Um, but the other piece of this is that budget will literally only take you so far. Even if we wanted to tell Google we want to spend $1 million a day, there could be limitations, not just from a search volume perspective, but there could also be drastic limitations through what's called their quality score, where if we're not a strong enough advertiser in terms of quality score, Google will absolutely limit our market share. And in some cases, in most cases, frankly, I've seen our most market share before while we're doing these audits being limited by a range of 60% and upwards of 90% as well. So it can be a pretty drastic impact here in how we can optimize this. So just to take a step back a little bit here, the quality score is an indication on a scale of 0 to 10, where Google ranks based on your keywords to say 0 being the lowest, of course, and then 10 being the highest. On a metric, looking at our ad copy relevance, looking at our landing page relevance, looking at our bidding strategy, looking at our conversion rates, looking at a number of different metrics, effectively trying to say on a fairly subjective thing, right? Like how good we are as an advertiser, how do we rank on a scale of 1 to 10, right? And the reason why this is so important and often overlooked, in my opinion, by a lot of advertisers is because it does require a bit of effort to make this happen, but it's extremely important because not only does it impact potential market share, but it also directly impacts how much we pay. Where if we have a score of 6 out of 10 or lower, we're being both penalized on our bid. So, for example, we might be paying more, excuse me, and it will be also be penalizing our market share, where we literally, even if we try to spend as much money as possible, Google will literally only let us take so much potential market share. So for a quick example here, I've shown the kind of the breakdown here of what the kind of quality score looks like. So for example, if your quality score is at a 1 out of 10, you might be losing on 40% of market share on that specific keyword, but also paying 30% more per click, right? Versus a 2 out of 10, again, would be a little bit softer, but 35% less market share, 25% bid penalty, etc. And as you can imagine, as you get beyond that 6 out of 10, the inverse happens, where you'll be getting more market share on a similar spend, and you'll actually be getting a bid reduction. So you might see 10% less cost per click than what you're paying before. You might be seeing 50% less cost per click before, 20% less cost per click than before, etc. And the reason why this is so important is because even if you're given objectives, say, we have to grow on a similar budget, it seems almost impossible on a paid channel, of course, to say, hey, it's getting more expensive, CPCs are increasing, how are we going to do this on the same spend? The way you do this is through quality score optimization, because if you can optimize your quality scores and you can get that incentive either by removing a bid penalty you're likely facing, or the opposite side of that, getting it above a 6 out of 10 and actually getting a reduction on your bids, that allows you to spend the same amount of money and get drastically more clicks on a similar spend because you optimize for quality score. And the last thing I'd call out here too, in terms of quality score, you might be saying, hey, Mark, that's great, but we have tons of keywords. We have hundreds of different keywords. How do I really know what to prioritize here? This is also where the revenue-based model waterfalls into everything that you'd be doing across search, because the best way to understand this is by categorizing what's driving opportunities for you, right? Just export all your data, then look at what's driving actual opportunities for you on a keyword level, and then also look at what's called the absolute top lost rank in bracket rank is the metric in Google, because that allows you to understand how much market share are we losing because of a low quality score. And then what you can effectively do is do a quick measurement of saying, if we were to increase our market share, right, versus our top opportunity keywords, excuse me, that would allow you to understand what is the upside to improving our quality score in a very logical way. And then it'll make it a really clear path to say, okay, these are the first 5 keywords we need to focus on optimizing our quality score. And this is the anticipated impact of scaling our opportunity and what that could be, again, while keeping the same budget. And this is a really strong tactic that we use once we have all these other things set up for our clients. This is what we really focus on for our clients as well, help them understand how not only can they invest more money more efficiently if they'd like to, but also how they can get that much more off of an existing spend. And this enables really this optimization is to enable all of this to really push through and to allow for that scalability and to build the business case to keep investing without seeing that kind of CPC creep happening with time.
Yeah, Mark, as you've looked at this in your experience, what's the biggest swing you've seen? So, I mean, this is a massive, really important concept, right? So, if you're getting the difference between like a 10% penalty and a 10% improvement is huge. But what's the biggest swing you've seen? Have you seen like a 50% penalty go to a 50% improvement? What can clients expect from here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I've definitely seen some pretty significant changes where we went from like 1 out of 10 in some cases, and pushed that up to like an 8 out of 10. Transparently, it is harder to get that to a perfect 10 out of 10 on non-brand, just because you're never ever going to ever be able to get kind of perfectly to that 10 out of 10. It's kind of reserved for more branded keywords. But generally speaking, I've seen this improve efficiency pretty drastically to the point where, in one recent example for a client, they're spending over 6 figures a month on ads. They felt like it kind of became a little bit stagnant. And then as we focus just through quality score optimizations, which I'll circle back to in the next 2 slides here, we're able to literally take the ROAS from a 3x to over a 20x ROAS on that pipeline, just
Wow.
because we're able to not only train Google to be more efficient, to drastically improve their operates, but also we're able to massively enable in a very competitive space. We're able to drastically control for that cost per click creep. And so we were able to simultaneously improve the operates very significantly, almost by 4x, while simultaneously pulling down that cost per click and that upfront cost per lead, by about 40% as well. And so net net, that made to a drastic improvement on the overall ROAS.
Wow, that's huge. And in this topic of quality score, so one way to do that is obviously with landing pages and content on landing pages. In an ideal world, you could have, well, you could have a landing page for a campaign. You can have an ad for every campaign, for every ad group, and or for every keyword. I mean, in an ideal world, how granular should you go when it comes to landing page optimization to keyword?
Definitely. So I'll touch a bit more on like what that actually looks like in terms of the optimizations in the next few slides here. But ultimately, I would say it really depends on the case by case for the business. Twofold being what the opportunity is. Again, as I kind of mentioned, looking at op value versus the amount that's currently lost due to a low quality score to understand what the impact is for the business. And that's how I would really look at it. Where in theory, there could be an indefinite amount of work where you can infinitely be finding new keywords, infinitely be finding ways to optimize that quality score, et cetera. But eventually, again, the diminishing returns will kick in, where it might be a really low volume keyword that's not really worthwhile. But you might find that even if you just focus on your top 20 keywords, for example, you might be able to find just focusing on those top 20, because there's so much potential that's being lost there, that in theory could double, 4x, et cetera, your account overnight just through that work. So again, it's a little bit case by case, but I would highly suggest that you focus on minimum 5 to 20, based off of priority for your business on a case by case business
Yeah, it sounds like there's a
basis.
massive ROI opportunity for building better landing pages, building more landing pages, building more tailored landing pages for your campaign. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
great,
Absolutely.
great recommendation.
Wonderful. And just to clarify too, it's both the short-term impact, but also from a long-term perspective, this is the only way to enable your account to really be able to grow long-term as well. So again, there's that short-term benefit of controlling CPCs, making that more efficient up front, but it's extremely important to unlock this for that long-term growth potential to open up your market share potential if you decide you want to invest as a business. Okay, so really kind of talking through quality score here on a very practical level. Um, so really the main kind of call out here, first and foremost, is on the ad copy side. So first and foremost here is just testing, right? So it's really critical that your ad copy speaks, of course, to your keyword set. And this is also why back in step two, I suggested we want to restructure our campaigns accordingly to allow for exact, phrase, and broad, just because inherently on an exact match campaign, for example, you can literally have the exact keywords in your ad copy versus a broad match campaign. You might want the copy to speak a little bit more generally, right? But ultimately, the goal here is to say Google is trying to make ads as easy as possible for the prospect, and the way they measure that is basically saying in that search, if your ad is answering that search properly, is relevant to that search properly, you're going to have a higher click through rate. And if you have a higher click through rate, therefore your ad is more relevant. And you'll have a higher quality score. Google will serve your ad more consistently. You'll get a nice discount on CPCs, et cetera. And so the way to say, okay, all makes sense. How do we optimize our click through rate? The two main areas that I see work very, very well is first and foremost what we would call, what Google calls dynamic keyword insertion. And all that literally does, and again, if like I won't go in the weeds here on the documentation, please reach out. Happy to chat through how to actually implement these as needed. But really on the dynamic keyword insertion, the way that it works is that Google will swap in or with the parameters around your ad, Google will then insert the actual keyword itself that you're targeting. So it's not based on what somebody actually searches for, because that could lead to a lot of randomness. And that's not how it works. It's just based on your match keywords. So as long as your match keyword is relevant, which it absolutely should be, then that'll swap that into the headline itself. So then, therefore, for example, if we have an ad group that has 20 different keywords, we literally can't build 20 ads anymore, right? We can only have 3 responsive search ads. So it's impossible to match to every single keyword within the ad group, for example, on that keyword, unless on that ad, unless we use a dynamic keyword insertion. So it's a really nice way to drastically improve your click-through rate. I'm not exaggerating when I say I've seen this improve click-through rates upwards of 100 to 200% fairly consistently, just because it matches what this person is searching for so well that it works really, really well. And then the other side of it too, within those kind of 3 responsive search ads per ad group, of course, this is dependent on each business, but we really want to be intentional with what we're testing in terms of the themes of the ads, right? So again, I would highly recommend we use that dynamic keyword insertion, ideally in the first headline across our ads to improve that click-through rate. But we also want to understand what is going to drive a better click-through rate, what's going to drive a better conversion rate for us, what's really the need behind a lot of these searches, and that's where really pulling out the the different themes behind the ads can be very effective. So, for example, the 3 kind of themes that we've used in the past that I've found has worked well, at least to kind of get the ball rolling and get some initial learnings, is first and foremost what I call like a hard sell, meaning the messaging is very focused on pushing the person to convert, right? So this might be where we use a discount. This might be when we're pushing someone to demo. For example, sign up for a demo, get free AirPods, for example, right? And really pushing the user to talk to sales. This hard sell messaging, again, I would highly recommend is reserved for people that are more exact match. Maybe they belong to your marketing segment on your search campaigns, whatever it may be, but generally a fairly technical and informed audience where they're not necessarily deciding on what product or service is right for them, but they're deciding on what vendor is best for them. So that's where the hard sell works really, really well, in my opinion. The next theme too here is going to be really around social proof. So this could mean more testimonials, talking about the total number of customers that use your product or service, really finding ways to build trust within your peer set to basically say to them, to your prospects, your peers use our product or service, and therefore you should trust us to be the right product or service for you as well, right? Again, this could kind of be a little bit more kind of mid funnel, in my opinion, where they might still be researching the right product or service for them, but also finding that right vendor. That's a really nice sweet spot to build that trust that we're the right brand for them. And then again, push them into that maybe more hard sell messaging as a final step. And then lastly, too, is what we would call more product focused. So this again isn't necessarily selling them on why your brand is the best option, but more educating this group on what the product does, what some of the product features are, what some of the service features may be, those types of things, where it's a lot more kind of an educational audience. And this can work really well for more broad match campaigns, where again, just inherently broad, is going to a little bit more top of funnel. It inherently is going to be a little bit more in that early kind of research stage. So we want to make sure that we're really plugging that into the appropriate level and to really match back to that keyword, with the intention being, how do we improve our click-through rate while simultaneously maintaining at a minimum or improving our conversion rate as well, because that will be how we can improve the ad relevance category within the quality score formula.
Yep. Mark, that makes a lot of sense. As you think about these different strategies, it seems like this mirrors, the customer journey, the buying process pretty clearly, right? So you've got the social proof, you've got product focused ads, you've got the hard sell. In your experience, if people just want that highly qualified lead, is the hard sell always the best way to go, or do they really need to be educating buyers all the way through the journey, early, mid, and late, in order to really optimize the campaigns?
That's a great question. So it honestly really comes down again to the audience, right? So these are just general high level recommendations. But one thing I've noticed, and this is specifically my experience, whenever I've tried to market towards like lawyers or towards engineers, for example, a very technical audience where they're looking for a very specific set of, I need feature A, B, C, for example. they do not respond well to a hard sell message, even if they're pretty deep in the funnel and they're looking to really buy. They often are looking for um, very specific tools, for example, or services, etc. And so, generally speaking, that product focus can work there. So again, the caveat across all of this is it ultimately depends on your customer to really understand what does your customer care about. But generally speaking, I would say in most cases, the hard sell works best to kind of drive those qualified leads, people that are technical, they're ready to go, they're experienced. But there's a pretty big statement on that, asterisk on that statement, where if it again, it's a more technical audience or someone that maybe won't respond as well, frankly, to marketing jargon. Again, like the lawyers, engineers, in my experience, that's where really leaning more into the actual product and being very factual in your ads and not using hyperbole or saying like really big things, right? Um, that's where the product focus can work a little bit better in terms of that kind of like the bottom of funnel stage.
Yeah, that's helpful. It just strikes me that this is a very important and strategic part of managing these campaigns. And often people just focus on Google PPC at a tactical, technical level and kind of thinking more strategically about the ad, the message, the value proposition is super important. So I'm really glad you highlighted this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, and the last thing here to talk about on the quality score side is going to be our landing page optimization. So as Dave mentioned, this is going to be absolutely critical, not only to the success of our conversion rate in terms of our lead quality. Absolutely, we always highly recommend using landing pages because they're really built to sell essentially. But the next step here is once we have a template of a landing page that we're really happy with, what I would highly recommend is that we actually want to duplicate this out again with the understanding of if we target maybe our top 5 to 20 keywords, the intention would be to duplicate out our landing page for those types of keywords, right? Really, with the idea being Google, almost similar to how Google will look at SEO. Again, nowhere near as advanced as SEO, frankly speaking, but definitely a lot of similar elements here in terms of on page SEO and what Google paid is looking for in terms of that landing page optimization. It's really critical that we have multiple landing pages to fill those different keywords because Google is literally going to be looking for that specific keyword and the various keyword sets around that as well on that landing page. And the way that we want to do this is by having, again, duplicated out that landing page so that each version of that page is for that specific keyword. And you'll see not only will your quality score improve drastically, but also your conversion rate should improve as well because the person in that search is looking for a very specific thing. And then if we have a landing page that talks just about that thing, and again is optimized towards that, for example, if we're talking about a management software, right? That can be a little bit more general and talk about the overall features of the management software. But if we're selling billing within that management software, we should absolutely have a dedicated billing page that's focused around billing features. And then the intention is we can duplicate that billing page to be the various keywords and iterations of the billing category. And the way that we want to do that is by having the keyword kind of sprinkled throughout the page. So again, I would say 80% of your page will probably be similar, but that last 20% is going to be very, very critical. But we want to make sure that our keyword is in our URL, right? We want to make sure that it's kind of sprinkled throughout our headlines, sprinkled throughout our subheadlines, our copy. Again, it absolutely has to make sense. We don't want to make sure that we're just going too technical here and stuffing keywords where it doesn't make sense. That's not what I'm suggesting. We want to make sure that this is a logical placement for these keywords and that it flows well for the prospect while still meeting the needs of the technical side. Depending on what instance you're using, for example, if you're using an unbounced or if you're using like an Instapage, for example, to manage your landing pages, you do have options for dynamic keyword insertion there as well, where you can essentially use your UTM string to then plug in that keyword to different places on the page as well, which can work very well. And then, of course, a few other kind of things that I call out here that I find to work really well for both a quality score perspective and conversion rate would be an FAQ, right? So we often find that FAQs are a great way to remove any barriers to risk for any kind of hesitancy that people might have before they convert. An FAQ is a really great place to kind of have that there, where you can talk about what the commitment is for your service, for example, how many people use your different service or product, those types of things, what features are included. It's a really nice way to kind of reduce any risk, while simultaneously it's a really great gold mine to find a way to consistently include your keyword. Because then you can basically say, how does keyword improve my efficiency of managing my business, for example, right? Or how does keyword help me save X number of hours per month, right? Where it's simultaneously you selling your product or service while also being able to kind of insert that keyword consistently to make Google happy while still using it as an opportunity to push and to sell and really to create that really strong landing page experience. And then lastly, too, the two other areas which can be a little bit trickier, but really looking at our technical optimization. So, like for example, our site speed, making sure our images are compressed, making sure that we don't have any code that's taking too long to load, just those types of things. Because if we have any technical issues with the landing page, where if it takes more than a second to load, if it takes if there's broken code or anything like that, that'll just be a killer for the page, or for both the prospect and from the technical side. So again, the idea here is to kind of build your kind of master version of the template and then duplicate that out so you can build variations to support the different keywords.
Yeah, it seems like that this is a very another very important area. Uh, it seems like the web team's got to be just a really important part of the process, right? So having a PPC person or an agency that's not connected to the web team is going to handicap you big time, right? Because there's all these little changes, all these things you're learning all the time that you're going to want to make improvements in landing pages, improvements in the web page speed. So, do you find that to be an important driver of success?
Yeah, absolutely. And our normal process too is that we will work with our clients where we can essentially use our instance of Unbalanced and our own kind of setup and code to then work on that domain. So for example, it would be like get.nowspeed.com. So we don't actually have access directly to our clients' domains in most cases, but that does allow us to still have it cohesive. So it looks like the prospect is all in one domain within that subdomain. And that allows us to have that control because we can work with our design and dev team. We know what's going to work in terms of landing pages and really what's going to drive results. And then we modify it for our clients. And then we just really hit the ground running to then duplicate that out to scale it up to allow for that efficiency. And that's really how we build these programs that are hitting this consistent triple digit growth for our clients because we're able to kind of just have the resources as well as the know-how to really scale these programs up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you've got to have that the integration between the technical PPC, all the strategies you've been talking about, and the creative and the landing pages. It's got to all work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so just a really quick wrap up here. Again, I just want to reiterate none of these things exist in a vacuum. It's all about how each one of these steps work together to enable that scale, right? We can't kind of pick and choose which one of these tactics we want to use. I highly recommend you consider leveraging all of them because they all work together and they're greater than the sum of the individual parts. And so this is really how we can scale the SEM pipeline. So again, if our goal is to say, okay, we want to create a sustainable, predictable, and scalable channel, the key elements here are going to be about understanding the right data and optimizing towards the right KPIs. So first and foremost, getting that revenue data back into the account so that Google and the human behind managing the account are optimizing towards the correct KPIs. Of course, finding the right users, the right keywords, but also finding the right users. So not just the search itself, but the who behind the search. Building out those customized landing pages and ads, again, to maximize that relevance, maximize your quality score, improve your costs drastically, and control for the potential of scale by making sure they're not limited of scale due to a low market share. And then lastly, too, just really understanding how we're training Google, training that machine learning, and just having all these components working together where every single component is then passing forward to the next piece. And that's really ultimately going to enable this program to scale very, very efficiently.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. Some really good ideas here. I know you shared a lot of powerful insights. In a typical audit, do you find, when you're looking at a client, new client account, do you find that they're kind of missing one or two of these things, or is it dozens of these things, in a
Yeah.
campaign? Because there's a lot to do here.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to do here. And often what I'll find in the audits is depending on the kind of the maturity of the account, it can definitely vary. But I would say a lot of these tactics are things that sometimes people have never even heard of, or they're kind of familiar with, but maybe weren't executed properly. And sometimes that can create its own issue where if you're not very consistent with the execution itself, again, it can kind of create that bad learning loop rather than an effective learning loop. So it's definitely an area that I've seen a lot of clients struggle with. But that being said, when they do come on board with us and we're able to help them, it totally changes their opinion on PPC. Oftentimes, a lot of clients come to us and say, "Hey, we tried PPC a couple of times with different agencies, haven't been able to kind of crack that nut. haven't figured out what the right program is here for us, but we have the appetite for growth. Everyone's telling us PPC is working. Why can't we make that work for us? Oftentimes, it's because they don't have the right strategy in place, where they've done a lot of different tactics. Those tactics don't really compile together into a proper strategy, and that's often where that gap is really missing. Where again, PPC tactics are easy to do, but how you build that overall strategy and have those be greater than the sum of the individual, that's where that strategy really comes into play. And that's really where, again, unless you're hands on keyboard every day, it's difficult, understandably, to really understand that. So that's where having someone that can partner with you and build that strategy can really help enable the channel to thrive.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks again, Mark, for sharing all these great ideas. These are some very powerful strategies, and you've made a huge difference in many clients. So, yeah, thanks for sharing this today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for the time.